You are standing in the center of the Forum Boreum, Rome's oldest marketplace, surrounded by dust, heat, and a crowd of strangers. The marble beneath your feet burns from the midday sun, but your hands are colder than stone. You're 14. Your tunic has been freshly laundered, your hair styled with scented oil, and your face powdered to hide the fear. To the watching men, you're not a girl. You're a prospect. Your father stands behind you, one hand on your back to keep you still. In front of you, a Roman official unrolls a scroll, reads out your name, your age, your family standing. A murmur ripples through the crowd. You're aware of how many eyes are on you, counting your fingers, studying your posture, appraising your worth. Then one man steps forward. He doesn't speak to you. He speaks to your father, quietly, quickly, as if discussing livestock or land. A nod is exchanged. You try to speak, but your father's grip tightens. You're led off the platform, not with ceremony, but with efficiency. No flowers, no music, no consent. This is how marriages begin in Rome, not with love, but with transaction. You may have heard that Roman weddings were noble, full of tradition and beauty, that women were cherished as the matronae of the Republic. You may have pictured flowing stolas, festive banquets, and smiles under flowered veils. But that was only for the statues. In truth, what many called a marriage market was exactly that. A public square where eligible girls, some not yet fully grown, were evaluated by strangers and offered as bargaining tools. Every nod, every handshake, every line on a scroll was part of a silent system that turned daughters into dowries and husbands into owners. And the Forum wasn't just a place of commerce, it was law. Roman legislation, like the Lex Julia de Maritandis Ordinibus, enforced strict expectations. Remaining unmarried beyond a certain age could result in penalties. Marrying within your social class wasn't just encouraged, it was enforced. Alliances were everything, and women were the vessels through which those alliances were sealed. A girl's body, name, and potential to bear heirs became her family's greatest asset or greatest liability. And so they displayed you like a promise of stability, of lineage, of control. You stand in a line with other girls, each of you dressed to suggest modesty, yet chosen for youth and appearance. One father boasts about his daughter's dowry, another about her mother's fertility. A senator's steward scribbles down notes as if drafting a contract. No one speaks to you directly. No one asks what you want. Your voice has no weight here, only your silence does. And here's where it gets even more chilling. If your future husband is displeased after the wedding night, if he claims you were not as described, he can send you back. The marriage can be annulled. Your family may be forced to return the dowry. Your name might not recover. In some cases, your life won't either. So families take precautions. They coach their daughters. They perform ceremonies. They even prepare cloths to prove the event, whether or not nature cooperates. Because Roman marriage wasn't just public, it was performance. And once the contract was signed, you became subject to the manos, legal authority transferred from your father to your husband. From that moment, your identity no longer belonged to you. In many cases, even your property, if any, became his. Your role was set. Be obedient, be fruitful, be silent. Marriage was not an escape from family expectations, it was their continuation under a new name. Some girls found kindness, others did not. But either way, the system didn't ask. And behind every smiling procession, every veil, every song, was a cold truth carved into the very foundation of Roman law. Your future wasn't chosen. It was arranged. And sometimes arranged with alarming calculation. Because wealth wasn't always enough. Sometimes status required spectacle. Some elite families began staging public auctions, mock ceremonies where daughters were offered before spectators, not to be married off immediately, but to increase their perceived value. Fathers invited influential men to observe the display, whispering offers that had already been rejected. It was theater. But the girls didn't know that, and neither did the suitors. They only knew they were being watched, and sometimes chosen. Or not. You imagine your wedding day will be different, that the man now speaking with your father will treat you gently, that the bath oils and flower crowns and feasting means something more. But deep down, you already know the truth. Because what comes next isn't a celebration. It's a test. And if you fail it, if you're not what they expected, you won't get a second chance. Not here. Not in Rome. And as the sun sets on the forum, the scribe seals the scroll with wax. Your name is on it, but your life is no longer yours. You sit on the edge of the marriage bed, your legs stiff, your breath held like it might hold back time itself. The room smells of rose oil and sweat. Outside, the murmur of voices hasn't faded. Your new husband's guests are still feasting, still waiting to hear whether the union has been fulfilled. On the wall, a ceremonial cloth hangs, white and empty. It will not remain that way for long. You were told that tonight would seal your future, but no one told you how it would be proven. In ancient Rome, weddings didn't end with ceremony. They ended with evidence. The act itself, the consummation, was the final clause of the contract. Without it, the marriage wasn't legally binding, which meant your body was the last item up for scrutiny. And the confirmation? It had to be seen, or at the very least, believed. Which is why so many Roman households kept white linens close at hand. The next morning, if the cloth showed no blood, if your husband was dissatisfied, you could be sent back to your family in disgrace, returned like faulty merchandise, stripped not only of honor, but of opportunity. And for some girls, that meant more than embarrassment. It meant exile. It meant silence. It meant being marked forever. But here's where the facade fractures even more. Because Roman marriage was not built on affection. It was built on utility. Wives were not chosen for compatibility. They were selected for alliance, for inheritance, for wombs that would bear Roman citizens. Love wasn't expected. Emotion wasn't required. What mattered was control, legal, economic, and generational. And Roman law made sure that once you were a wife, there was no going back. The manus clause of marriage transferred not just responsibility, but ownership. Your husband became your legal guardian. You couldn't own property independently. You couldn't testify in court. In many cases, you couldn't even leave the house without permission. From girl to bride to possession. That was the sequence. And if your husband died, you might think that gave you freedom. But under Augustus's Lex Papia Poppaea of 9 AD, widows were required to remarry within a set time or face heavy penalties. A woman between 20 and 50 had exactly 18 months to find another husband. After that, she was fined a portion of her inheritance. The message was clear. You weren't allowed to exist outside the system, not even in grief. And the more elite your family, the stricter the scrutiny. Archaeological records show detailed marriage contracts from Pompeii, Ostia, and Herculaneum, where clauses outlined obligations down to the number of children expected. Some even specified penalties if no child was born within the first year. These weren't love letters, they were ledgers. But this is where the horror becomes systematic. In some cases, daughters were married off multiple times to consolidate land, seal business deals, or strengthen alliances. Roman girls became tokens, passed between powerful families like pieces on a chessboard. Each time, the rituals repeated. The display, the veil, the bed. And each time their worth was reappraised, not by their minds, but by their performance. You, now a wife of just one day, sit by the window of your husband's villa, watching the servants prepare another feast. He is away, speaking with his brother about trade routes. You haven't spoken since last night. You haven't cried. You're not allowed to. Because what matters now is not what happened. It's what can be proven. And there's another horror that looms larger than all the others. The law. Under Roman legal doctrine, a husband could repudiate his wife with a simple statement. No trial, no explanation, no recourse. If he accused her of adultery, she could be stripped of her dowry and forced into exile. If he suspected infertility, he could remarry again and again until he had a male heir. And what about the wife? She had no right to initiate divorce until centuries later. Even then, it came at the cost of reputation, family honor, and sometimes survival. Now imagine this. Your husband has 3 daughters already. He wants a son. You failed to deliver. You know what that means. You've heard the stories. Some women are quietly sent away, others accused of moral failings, of disloyalty, of impiety. All are made invisible. And yet the same society that scrutinizes your bloodline refuses to question his. That's the cruelty. That's the imbalance. And here's what makes it worse. Because while you live under the shadow of dowry clauses and loyalty oaths, Roman men were free to take concubines, to visit brothels, to engage in extramarital affairs without legal consequence. Even elite senators kept mistresses openly. But if a woman was even suspected of similar behavior, she could be disowned, punished, or worse. Double standards weren't just cultural, they were codified. Aulus Gellius, writing in the 2nd century, recounts how men defended their freedom by claiming virtue belonged to the state, not the home. Wives were for lineage. Everything else? Indulgence. And so the system protected male pleasure while weaponizing female obedience. And if you think this hypocrisy was hidden, think again. Juvenal's satires from the early 2nd century openly mocked women who sought freedom, accusing them of madness for wanting control over their own bodies. A wife who thinks, he wrote, is more dangerous than a sword. This was the atmosphere you were born into, one where silence was the safest choice, and obedience the highest virtue. You were not just expected to endure this world, you were expected to defend it, to raise your daughters in it, to disappear into it. But here's the real horror. Most never knew another way. The system was so complete, so generationally ingrained, that even rebellion was shaped by its terms. A woman who fought for autonomy had only 2 tools, marriage or exile. Those who stayed paid with silence. Those who left paid with everything else. And yet, some resisted. A few names survive. Hortensia, who spoke before the Roman Senate to defend the rights of women's property. Clodia, accused of scandal but unrepentant. Women who, in whispers or in courtrooms, tried to pull at the seams of the system. But their stories are the exception. Yours is the rule. You sit alone now in a quiet atrium, counting the days since your wedding, rehearsing the steps of being acceptable. You've learned to smile when spoken to. You've learned to answer when prompted. You've learned not to ask. And you've learned this. In ancient Rome, being married didn't mean you were chosen. It meant you were claimed. And if you want to understand just how deep that claim runs into laws, customs, and bodies, then you need to see what's coming next. Because the Roman marriage market wasn't just for brides. It was for slaves, for girls, for anyone deemed useful. And the next revelations will leave you breathless. If uncovering these buried truths makes you want to understand more, to question what you were taught about ancient civilization, then stay with this journey. These aren't just facts. They're the lives behind the marble statues. And what happens next will change how you see all of it. The morning begins like all others now, waking before the sun, washing in silence, dressing in fabric you didn't choose. You move through your husband's villa like an echo, always present, never heard. But today is different. Today, he has summoned you to the garden, not for conversation, but for observation. You follow him past marble columns and manicured laurel trees until you reach the stone wall that overlooks the lower courtyard. Below, a dozen girls stand barefoot in the dust, flanked by older men holding writing tablets. One by one, the girls are instructed to walk, turn, and smile. They do as they're told. They always do. At first, you think these are citizen daughters being arranged into marriages like you once were. But they're not. These are slaves, and they are being inspected for something far worse. Because what Roman law called a nuptial agreement in high society became something entirely different in the lower ranks, a hybrid of auction and ritual, where enslaved women and girls were sold not just for labor, but for reproductive use. Their marriages weren't recorded in temples. They were sealed in household ledgers under the category of familia. And in many cases, those unions weren't optional. They were assigned. This is the part most history books don't mention. In elite Roman households, the boundary between wife, concubine, and servant was a shifting line, one that could be redrawn with a gesture. Slave girls were often paired with male slaves to breed stronger offspring. These children became vernae, born into slavery, raised within the walls of the same homes their mothers served. You watch as one of the girls is brought forward. Her body is barely developed, her tunic threadbare. A steward points to her legs, noting posture, balance, and weight. He makes a mark on the tablet and nods. The man standing beside him smiles and begins haggling. The girl never speaks. She isn't asked to, because in this market, speaking is a privilege, and she does not have it. What makes this system even more twisted is how cleanly it integrates into Roman domestic life. It's not hidden. It's normalized. The paterfamilias, the male head of household, holds absolute authority not just over his wife and children, but over every person under his roof. That includes enslaved women. If he chooses to pair them with someone, they have no legal right to object. And if he chooses to take them for himself, there are no penalties, no courts, no shame. This wasn't a secret perversion. It was a civic arrangement protected by law and reinforced by tradition. Roman law recognized the power of the master over enslaved persons to such an extent that even forced reproduction was seen as economic strategy, not personal violation. And the wealthier the family, the more calculated the process became. Household records from Pompeii, Herculaneum, and Roman Egypt show references to survey enslaved women assigned to certain male slaves during specified years, with notes about births, survivability, and sale value of resulting children. These weren't just pairings. They were breeding programs disguised as domestic policy. You think about your own wedding, the ceremony, the feast, the veil. These girls will have none of it. No procession, no garland, no legal recognition. Only a command followed by consequences. And here's where the cruelty deepens. Once a slave woman gave birth, her child could be sold separately. Some masters waited until the child was 3 or 4, strong enough to fetch a good price. Others sold infants immediately, forcing mothers back into service without pause. Maternal attachment wasn't a factor. Only value was. You close your eyes, trying to erase the sound of the steward laughing as he finalizes the sale. But the sound clings to your skin like dust. This wasn't some fringe practice. It was systemic. Cato the Elder, Rome's model of discipline and virtue, openly advocated selling slaves when they aged past usefulness. In De Agricultura, he described keeping female slaves for labor, but ensuring they bore children to increase household numbers. Sell the old, he wrote, and keep the strong. Let nothing be idle. This wasn't cruelty. It was considered wisdom, and it extended far beyond private households. Prominent slave markets in Delos and Ephesus openly dealt in the trade of those in early stages of life, often highlighting their youth and suitability for domestic service as key selling points. Inscriptions found in Pompeii include auction notes such as, girl, age 13, Greek-speaking, fertile, no deformities. These weren't humans. They were inventories. And the most disturbing part? Many Roman citizens believed this was a form of care. That giving a slave girl to a respectable male slave or taking her into the familia as a concubine was a way of ensuring she was looked after, even rewarded, as long as she didn't resist. But resistance had a price. Girls who defied pairings or refused to comply were punished, sometimes physically, sometimes by separation from their children. In extreme cases, they were sold to harsher masters, or condemned to field labor where survival was uncertain. Silence was the only safety. And even that wasn't guaranteed. You step away from the garden wall. Your husband is still watching the courtyard, discussing numbers, names, suitability. The same language he used to choose you. The same logic. And for the first time, you understand something terrifying. You were never exempt from this system. You were simply at a higher tier of it. Because whether dressed in silk or wool, citizen or slave, your body in Rome was not yours. It was recorded, regulated, and, if necessary, replaced. And if they did it to the girls in the courtyard, they could do it to you. They still might. This is more than history. This is how power worked and still works. If you're ready to uncover what Rome buried beneath law and ceremony, hit subscribe and don't look away. What comes next will make you question everything. Coming up, The lines between marriage, slavery, and survival will blur even further when Rome's obsession with bloodlines turns the bedroom into a battlefield and daughters into diplomatic currency. The next revelation will make you question whether love ever had a place in Roman life at all, and if this glimpse into Rome's hidden machinery has shifted how you see its marble facades and gilded legends. There's more waiting. Because the truth of history lies not in monuments, but in the lives erased beneath them. Keep watching and keep questioning. What comes next will haunt the ruins. You wake to the sound of voices outside your window. Two men arguing softly beneath the colonnade. One voice is your husband's. The other belongs to his cousin, a wealthy merchant from Ostia. You are told he came to discuss grain shipments, but his real business isn't trade. It's marriage. And the offer he brings isn't for you. It's for your niece, barely 12 years old. You rise slowly, the air in the room thick with incense from the household shrine. Your hands tremble as you fasten your stola, the cloth catching slightly on your shoulder. You know what's coming. You've seen it before. You've lived it. But this time, it's different. Because this time, you are being asked to help arrange it. Her father is dead. Her mother, a widow with no dowry, has no power to resist. The merchant's terms are generous. Land, coin, and protection for the girl's family. But there's a condition. He wants her ready by spring. The euphemism is cruel. Everyone knows what it means. She'll be sent to his villa before her first cycle, groomed by older servants, trained in silence and submission. There will be no ceremony, no contract filed in the forum. Just a girl placed in a chamber and told to obey. You try to object, quietly, respectfully, but your husband gives you a look that stops the words in your throat. He reminds you of the family's debts, of your own tenuous place. And just like that, you understand. Your compliance is not requested. It's expected. Because in Rome, even girls too young to understand marriage were considered fair offerings. And the more powerless the family, the more likely they were to be sacrificed. This is where Roman marriage practices take a darker turn, when girls became pawns in arrangements that didn't even pretend to protect them. And here's the horror most historians won't tell you. Not every Roman bride was a citizen. Some weren't even free. The boundaries were fluid. Families desperate to secure favor or climb the social ladder often offered enslaved girls as concubinae, informal companions who shared a bed but not a name. These arrangements were common, accepted, even encouraged. The concubinatus was recognized by law, but offered no protections, no inheritance, no dignity. And even among citizens, the idea of age was dangerously flexible. The legal age for marriage in Rome was astonishingly young, 12 for girls, 14 for boys. But that was just the letter of the law. In practice, girls were often promised earlier. Betrothals could happen in infancy. And once a girl was legally married, consummation could begin immediately, no matter her maturity, no matter her understanding. The historian Valerius Maximus tells of noble families marrying daughters off at 10 or 11 to secure political alliances, with some even parading the girls in public ceremonies to display their beauty and lineage. Not their consent. Never their consent. And it gets worse. Because if a bride failed to conceive quickly, the blame fell squarely on her shoulders. Barrenness, real or perceived, was grounds for annulment, disgrace, or replacement. In elite circles, women suspected of infertility were often subjected to humiliating fertility rituals. Some were made to visit temples where priests performed invasive ceremonies. Others were instructed to bathe in specific waters, drink animal blood, or submit to the embrace of temple men, known for curing barren wombs. The burden of proof never shifted. It was always hers, even when the fault lay with her husband. Roman physicians, guided by Galenic theory, believed women's wombs could wander inside the body, causing madness or hysteria. One treatment included smoke therapy, fumigating the lower body to lure the womb back into place. Another involved forceful manipulation, always under male supervision, often without consent. These weren't fringe beliefs. They were standard medicine. And behind the medical veil lurked something more dangerous: the idea that women existed solely to produce heirs, not daughters, sons. And if a woman birthed girls repeatedly, she risked losing favor or being replaced entirely. In some households, new wives were brought in while the first was still present. Polygamy was illegal, but legal loopholes allowed men to keep multiple women under the guise of domestic necessity. The wife became the figurehead, the others, the breeders. And all of them were subject to one ultimate test: loyalty. Because the greatest crime a Roman wife could commit wasn't disobedience, it was secrecy. The Lex de Adulteriis Coercendis, passed under Augustus in 18 BCE, made adultery not just a personal betrayal, but a crime against the state. Husbands were required by law to prosecute their wives for infidelity. If they didn't, they could be punished themselves. The message was clear. A woman's body didn't just belong to her husband. It belonged to the Republic, and enforcement was brutal. Wives accused of adultery could be exiled, stripped of property, even executed, often on the testimony of a single witness. Yet husbands were allowed concubines, visits to brothels, and extramarital affairs without legal consequence. The imbalance wasn't hidden. It was designed. You try to explain this to your niece as you help her pack for the journey. She clutches a small wooden doll, the only toy she was allowed to keep. Her mother avoids your gaze. The merchant's carriage waits outside, draped in red fabric to mark the occasion. You place a hand on her shoulder, unsure what comfort you can offer. She asks if she'll see her family again. You lie, because that's what Rome expects. And as the wheels of the carriage disappear into the distance, you wonder how many others have traveled that road. How many girls were taken as wives or companions or servants, their names unrecorded, their stories lost in the margins of history. But the truth remains etched in the stone laws and family ledgers. In ancient Rome, marriage wasn't a union. It was a verdict. And for thousands of girls, it was a sentence handed down long before they ever spoke a word. Coming next, you'll see how the most intimate parts of Roman life, birth, fidelity, and even death were weaponized to maintain power, and how one of Rome's most sacred institutions became the sharpest tool of its cruelty. The worst is still to come. You stand at the edge of the atrium, surrounded by silence. The fountains trickle echoes against marble walls, but no one moves. No one speaks. Your husband has just died. His body lies in the adjoining chamber, wrapped in linen, eyes closed as if merely sleeping. But you're not grieving. Not yet. You're calculating. Because in Rome, A husband's death doesn't free a wife. It triggers a new form of captivity, legal, financial, and terrifying. Within hours, your home will no longer be yours. His will is being read. The Heredes, his legal heirs, are already gathering. You are not among them. As a Roman woman, you cannot inherit full control over property unless explicitly named. And even then, your rights are fragile, contingent, monitored. And worse, if you're still under 50 and childless, the Lex Papia Popea will punish you for widowhood. The clock begins now. You have 18 months to remarry. If you don't, your inheritance shrinks. Your dowry becomes a bargaining chip for others. And if you're suspected of manipulating the timeline, perhaps mourning too long, you can be fined for dolous or deceit. You are grieving a man you didn't love and being punished for not replacing him fast enough. But here's where Roman marriage law becomes truly unrelenting. If your marriage was cum manu, under your husband's authority, you have no legal claim over your own dowry unless he specifically returned it in writing. If your marriage was sin manu, under your father's control, you may not be entitled to any property at all unless your father also permits it. You float between men's signatures with no legal weight of your own. You have lived in this villa for over a decade, but now, legally, you are a guest, and the new heir, your husband's eldest brother, has made it clear you must leave by the end of the week. You nod, you pack, you obey. Because resistance isn't strength. In Rome, it's risk, and not just to yourself, but to every woman tied to you. This is the hidden cruelty of Roman law. Obedience didn't protect you. It merely prolonged your usefulness. Disobedience erased you, and the law was written to ensure that erasure could happen without trial, without violence, and without scandal. Just ink, just silence, just gone. The real horror lies not in the spectacle, but in the system. Roman marriage was embedded within an architecture of control so precise it didn't require whips or prisons. It used contracts, customs, and reputation. Women didn't need to be beaten into submission. They were born into it. Even childbirth, the most intimate and life-defining moment for a Roman woman, was shaped by this logic. You remember your neighbor's story? Lucilla, married at 13, gave birth at 15, and died before her 16th birthday. The birth was hard. Her small frame tore. The baby survived. She did not. Her husband mourned for the legally required 10 months. Then he remarried. His new wife was 14. No one blinked. No one asked questions. Because death in childbirth wasn't a tragedy in Rome. It was an expectation. Gravestones across the empire, like those catalogued in the Corpus Inscriptionum Latinarum, reveal a chilling pattern. Women who died at 15, 17, 19. Their epitaphs praise obedience, modesty, fertility, not intelligence, not spirit, only function. To Claudia Severa, who lived 16 years, 8 months, 3 days, she was a faithful wife. Faithful, not free. And even in death, women were denied dignity. If you died childless, your dowry was often returned to your birth family, but not your name. If your husband remarried, your memory could be erased entirely. Children from the new wife took precedence. Your likeness might remain on a bust, your name in a footnote, but your life would vanish from daily speech. Unless you produced a son, because in that case your memory might survive, not because you lived, but because of what you left behind. And that's the final cruelty of Roman marriage. Your value was always tied to someone else. A daughter might carry your smile, but she'd carry your burden too, because daughters inherited their mother's silence, and their grandmothers, and their great-grandmothers. Each generation trained to walk the same narrow path. Be modest, be fruitful, be still. Even religious life offered no escape. You think the Vestal virgins were protected? They were revered, but under threat. A Vestal who broke her vow of chastity wasn't exiled or shamed. She was buried alive. That was the law. Purity wasn't power. It was a cage. So when you hear your niece is being married next month to a man twice her age, a client of your late husband, you say nothing. You help her choose her veil. You tell her how to walk, when to speak, how to smile. You don't warn her about the wedding night, because that would change nothing. And the moment you see her in her bride's tunic, white, cinched high, crowned in marigold, you remember yourself. Not who you are now, who you used to be, the girl standing barefoot in the Forum Boreum, blinking into the sun, watching a wax tablet seal her fate. And you wonder quietly, how many women had their lives shaped by a contract they didn't sign? How many vanished between the lines of Roman law? How many walked through marriage, not toward a future, but into silence? In the final chapter, you'll step into the heart of Rome's darkest secret, how these practices weren't just tolerated, but normalized, praised, ritualized. You'll see how systematic control was celebrated as virtue, and how a civilization built on conquest applied that same logic to its own daughters. The climax awaits, and the truth at its core will leave no room for illusion. You are kneeling on the cold mosaic floor of a Roman bedroom, lit only by a single oil lamp. Its flame flickers as the door creaks open. Your daughter steps into the chamber. She's 12, draped in her bridal tunic, hair parted in the ancient style, silent. Tonight is her wedding night, and you can do nothing. You have prepared her as best you could, taught her when to bow, when to hold her breath, how to remain perfectly still when the husband enters. You kissed her forehead. You arranged the sheets. You left the door unlocked. This was your duty, because in Rome, the mother of the bride wasn't a guardian. She was a witness. The man waiting in the next room is 28. He is a senator's second son, ambitious and calculating. Your family needs this match. You are deep in debt. Your husband is ill. If your daughter fails to please, the contract may be rescinded, and with it, your entire future. So you listen, you pray, you wait for the moment that will determine whether your daughter becomes a wife or a liability. This is the climax of Roman marriage culture, not a celebration, a test, and it's passed in blood. In elite homes across the empire, the bedding ritual was a private ordeal with public consequences. Families demanded evidence. If the sheet bore no stain, if the bride didn't weep, if the groom complained, shame followed, sometimes quietly, sometimes violently. The woman bore the weight, always. And the deeper horror? She was expected to be grateful. Gratitude was sewn into the vows, into the tombstones, into the law. Roman wives were praised for submission, endurance, and silence. They were honored not for their joy, but for their suffering. Statues of ideal matrons praised them as univiris, women who only married once, as if abstaining from future affection was the ultimate virtue. This wasn't love. This was obedience enshrined in marble. But here is the final, unbearable truth. This wasn't a system tolerated by the Romans. It was one they celebrated. At every level, from law to literature, Roman society upheld a fantasy of domestic order built on institutionalized inequality. Poets praised the silent wife. Orators mocked those who spoke. Even moralists like Seneca and Pliny the Younger wrote of ideal women as those who feared their husbands more than the gods. Control wasn't a flaw in the system. It was the system. Marriage became a miniature empire. One man ruling absolutely, one woman bound by ritual, law, and fear. She was to maintain the home, raise heirs, preserve lineage, and die quietly. If she deviated, if she loved someone else, or refused a pairing, or failed to conceive, she became a threat to the family, to the law, to Rome itself, and so the punishment followed. Not always in chains or blades, but in invisibility. Women who defied expectations were written out of records, denied funeral rites, or remembered only as cautionary tales. And those who complied, they were remembered, but only in fragments. She was modest, she was loyal, she was silent. These were the highest praises a Roman woman could earn. Now the room is still, the oil lamp guttering low. Your daughter hasn't called out. No one speaks. You won't know until morning if she succeeded. You won't know if she passed the test you once endured. All you know is that the door is closed. And so is her future. Because in Rome, from the moment a girl was promised in marriage, her fate became a script. And for centuries, that script went unchallenged. But now you've read it, word by word, life by life, not as myth, but as machinery. The resolution begins here. What you've seen in this story is not ancient anomaly. It's institutional memory. A civilization built on conquest extended its power into the most private corners of the home. Bodies were mapped like provinces. Wombs became the front lines of imperial survival. And for Roman women, silence was survival. But here's the echo that reaches across time. The methods didn't disappear. They evolved. Systems that reduce women to assets, whether through law, ritual, or expectation, still persist in countless forms. The terminology may shift, the institutions may wear modern faces, but the architecture remains. Control by contract, value measured by utility, autonomy negotiated instead of assumed. History teaches us nothing if we forget the names never written down. The girls sold without ceremony, the wives who bled and smiled, the mothers who whispered compliance through generations. You now know what they never could. And that knowledge is its own revolution. You came into this story believing Roman civilization was built on law, discipline, and honor. Now you leave understanding it was also built on silence, contracts, and control. The myths were carved in marble, but the truth? It lived and died in locked rooms, unsigned scrolls, and the unspoken pain of generations. If this journey has shattered what you thought you knew about Rome and awakened something deeper, an appetite for truth beneath the myth, then keep going. Subscribe not for spectacle, but for clarity. Because what comes next will take you further into the shadows history tried to bury. Because beneath every empire's marble lies the dust of those it buried.